Well, our next guest took many years to come forward and talk about what he's about to talk about on our show. Aaron Schultz says he was abducted by non human creatures multiple times over the course of his life when he was a child. And his memories are from about the age of 8 to about 10 years old, the fragmentary memories. He was compelled to come forward after hearing David Grush's testimony, hearing Congress openly discuss this. Seems like there's been more widespread acceptance. Members of the military coming forward and talking about this, so it perhaps is not become not as a taboo subject as it once was back in the day. And we decided to invite Aaron on the show to talk about his experience and to share it with our audience. I ask all of you to enter this conversation with an open mind, and we'll have Aaron on here to talk about his experience. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is really, really great to be here.
Well, my pleasure. I first learned about your story. I think I saw you make a post about it, and I don't know how it was presented to me, but I started going through your story, and I've heard this before. Let me just say, I've heard this from other individuals many times over. You're not the first person, but you are perhaps one of the few, the brave to come forward and to talk about it publicly in a public setting like this. I've heard from many people privately who've told me similar stories and who have not come forward in this way. So you came forward and shared your story on X. Maybe for our audience, you could just provide a little bit of context here as to what happened and then why you decided to come forward many, many years later. This happened to you as a child, yes?
Yes, it did. Well, what happened to me was when I was a kid, I was taken aboard a craft, flown and operated by non-human intelligence beings who were not of this world. Uh, I have, you know, I have three clear front to back memories of being taken that all happened the same way. I would be lying in my bed and I had this like window, like my bed was flush to the wall and the windowsill was right above my bed. And I would always, look out the window, look up at the sky as I was falling asleep. And I would see these green lights there was like small green lights going around in a circle, and then there was another green light in the center. And I couldn't tell at that point what the craft looked like other than it was just disc shaped. And it would fly over the neighbor's house and go out of my view. And then I would hear footsteps coming down the hall maybe a few minutes later. And the first time it happened, I was really, really scared because, when you're a kid, you know what your parents' footsteps sound like, and I knew it wasn't my parents. I knew it wasn't my little brother. And it sounded like a group of people. And then I slept with my door open. They would come in through the door to my room. One of them would sort of stand like off to the side in my doorway, and then the others would sort of there was five or six. It's hard to remember how many exactly. Five or six of them. Like most of them would file into the room, and there was one who would sort of just stand there like in my doorway, like waiting for the others. Then he would come in, and at that point they wouldn't say anything to me. It was like I suddenly got a very strong knowing that they wanted me to come with them. And I just felt compelled to go with them. I didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like I didn't at the time, I didn't feel like any harm would come to me if I didn't go with them, but it just, it was I had never, nor have I since then, felt like a it was like the thought projection almost in my head that okay, come on with us. And then I would, get out of my bed. They would lead me out my room and then down the hallway and sorry, out through the living room and then through these glass patio doors that led to the backyard. And that were already open when we walked through them. Like no one opened it. The doors were just open.
And they would normally be closed.
Yes, those doors were always closed. My dad was very like that was one of those things that like me and my brother would always make sure, because like that was like a hard rule. Like doors got to be closed. The wooden stick needs to be like there was like a wooden stick that we would keep to prop it closed.
Yeah, I grew up with a wooden stick in the slot behind the sliding glass door. Right.
Exactly. So you know what I'm talking about. And it was, and so we would go out, and it was just the first time it happened. I'll never forget it. It was, and the craft. We would walk out into the backyard, and the craft, and at this point, it was hovering like above the backyard area. We had a creek that ran behind our house with some woods, and it was hovering like it was. Honestly, I'm terrible at estimating like diameter and all that stuff. It couldn't have been more than like 40 or 50 feet across, but I don't know. It was hovering above my backyard, same green lights, but I could tell because it was closer to the house and the street lights were reflecting off of it. I could tell that it was like silver. And they would, walk me, like a few of them behind me, 2 or 3 of them in front of me. We would walk under the craft, and then the green light, it would start growing brighter, and then it would turn from green to this very, very just bright, like non-colored, just bright light. And when like it got to the point where I couldn't see, when the light died down, I was somewhere else. What in this white room that, there's everything looked connected, like a sponge. Like, what it reminds me of is like, how some playgrounds have that sort of rubbery, like, they don't do wood chips anymore. There's a lot of newer playgrounds have that sort of rubbery surface. That reminds me a lot of the floors and the walls. There was this in the middle of the room. There was this thing that reminded me kind of like of a dentist's light that was the ceiling. Everything, the thing on the ceiling, the table looked like it was growing out of the floor, and the light looked like it was the thing, whatever that it was, it looked like it was growing out of the ceiling. Everything looked attached to everything else.
Like all uniform in one way. And I know you have some images here that I hope we can share. You are a comic book artist, so you've drawn a lot of what you thought you saw those days. And so the images that we're showing here are your own drawings of what you saw. And as your former U.S. history teacher, you got out of that. You got out of that and focused exclusively on comic book artistry, and you're a fantastic artist here. So when this happened, where did this exactly happen? What town was this?
Chesterfield, Missouri.
Okay.
The town I was raised in, Chesterfield, Missouri. It's a smallish city, like sort of medium-sized city, maybe about 30 minutes away from like St. Louis proper.
And this happened what year approximately? The where this started? That night when you first had that first experience and you felt compelled to get on board.
That was 1996.
1996. So 8 years old, you hear these footsteps. You know it's not your parents. We all know the sound of our parents' footsteps. I would have been under my covers reading with a flashlight, reading comic books. and I hear the
That's
footstep,
exactly,
hear the footsteps of
yeah,
my parents click off the light. No, I'm asleep, Mom. I'm really
yeah,
asleep.
like that, exactly that, yeah.
So you feel compelled through some sort of telepathy to leave the house, go out the back sliding glass door, follow these creatures out into this ship. How tall were these creatures? Were they much taller than you at 8 years old?
They were around, they were either the same height as me or just a smidge taller than me.
Were they
I
wearing
was,
anything? Were they wearing a uniform or
they were wearing like a dark gray, tight fitting, like jumpsuit sort of thing. There weren't any seams. There weren't any, like, their hands were visible, but their feet were covered. Um, there were no like marks or insignias or belts. It was just like a solid, tight fitting, like dark gray, like jumpsuit sort of a thing they were wearing.
I have so many more questions here. I just as they come to me here. You're sitting on board this craft then. You
Mhm.
notice the sponginess of the ground. You notice the uniformity of the design. Everything seems to flow as if it's all
Mhm.
connected somehow, as if it's been, it almost sounds like it's almost like someone poured it like water and it just like flowed together as one uniform
That
structure.
that's exactly right. I've always struggled to explain. That's exactly what it looked like. Yes.
Hmm. Picturing like Terminator 2, molten version of a character coming together. So you're sitting in this room with a sort of table that comes out of the floor. And did
Mhm.
you have a sense of time? Did you know what time it was, how long you were there, and what then unfolded while you were sitting there?
Well, once I was in the room, again, I got a knowing like, okay, I'm supposed to take my clothes off and get on the table. And
Like
so
an
that's
like an
what I,
examining table?
yes. And so that's what I did. And the thought process in my head was like, okay, I know what aliens are supposed to look like. These things look like aliens. This also kind of looks like a doctor's office. Maybe, I don't know. I did so. I stripped off my clothes. I laid down on the table, and then, well, and one of them would come up to me holding what looked like a wand. It looked like a metal wand. I don't know what else to call it. And he would in the mouth, and I'm guessing collecting. I have no idea what they were doing. I assume collecting DNA sample saliva. I have no idea.
Sorry, you cut
And
out there for a
then,
second. There was a hiccup in the signal there. So I'm sorry. You said
oh,
they put it in your mouth and scraped like
mhm,
maybe cells or something
like
from your
this.
mouth.
It was, yeah, like the like my cheek, my tongue. It just sort of seemed to just be like fiddling around with it in there. That went on for, it felt like a really long time, because especially that very first time I was really, really scared, because like I had no idea, like it was like it was so outside of what was ordinary for me. It kind of just made my whole mind go blank. Um, and then after they did the thing with the wand, the light, the thing coming out of the ceiling would turn on. It was just like it really looked a lot like a dentist, just slicker. Like there were no like hinges or anything. Again, it was just all made out of this material, but it like bent and like came out of the ceiling, then like bent another way, then like there was this like little like the same like white material, and then there was like a light, and it moved after they were done with the tool, whatever it was. The light would like pass over my body a few times. Didn't feel like anything, but it would, it appeared to be scanning me. For what purposes, I still have no idea. Um, and then after that, um, they would, they would, I would know that, okay, now it's time to get off the table. I, I put my clothes back on, and then and then when I got off the table, I noticed that there was an opening, like not a doorway, like it wasn't a door that slid open. I didn't see like the wall open up, but when I first appeared in the room, it was just one solid room. But when I got off the table, I swung my legs around. I noticed there was an opening out into what looked like a hallway. So I got my clothes back out into this curved hallway, and that um, I walked down this like curved hallway, again, a couple of them in front of me, a few of them behind me, to this other room that was it wasn't white and spongy. It was like this like cool gray color, but on the ceiling and on the floor there were these two like big white circles, and they would stand like around the thing, the white thing in a circle, wait for me to step on. They would like step onto it with me, and as soon as they were on it with me, the bottom and these white circles started glowing really, really bright, just like the light coming from the bottom of the craft had. And again, when the light got so bright I couldn't see anything, and then when the light dimmed, I would be in my backyard again with them. They would lead me back into my house with the doors still open. Um, and this is something I hadn't thought about this, but I'm remembering now that I'm going over this with you. The first time it happened, I remember being like, it struck me that the door was still open, because as a kid, it's like my dad had this like sixth sense. If like that door even cracked a little bit, like he was like, who opened the door? Like, but the door was still open, and we walk through it, and I get back in bed, and I would just lie there and fall asleep. Like, I got really, really tired. Now, I have no idea if they like made me sleepy, or if I don't know. I'm not sure, but I would go to sleep. Um, I have three experiences that were just like that, back to front, that I remember clearly, at least as best as I can recall. I have no idea if my memories were altered. I don't know. I couldn't say. That were just like that. And
Over the course
the
of a few
reason,
years, between 8 years old and about 10 years old, that you remember.
yes. Yes, and there was about a year separating each of these clear experiences. And I remember the second time, it was like, oh my God, they're back. Like they came back.
Yeah.
Like they're back. And there's a fourth experience that I don't remember being taken, but I remember being on the craft, and I remember being put back. And at that point, I was 10 years old. I was in fifth grade, and in between the 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 previous experience and this one, I was like I hadn't been too scared to talk to them, because I wanted to know what the hell was happening to me.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? Like, couldn't talk about it with my parents. Didn't want to like I was, I didn't think they would believe me. I didn't like I had no one to talk about this with, and like UFOs and aliens, this wasn't a subject I knew anything about. I At the time, I had no idea. Like, there were no books in my school library about like UFOs or anything like that. Um, but this fourth time, it this fourth time was different though, and they didn't. I it's the memory picks up when I'm walking down that curved hallway, but again, there's like a couple of them in front of me, a few of them in back of me. They lead me into this other room that the floor is the same white spongy material, but the walls were like lime green and made of I couldn't tell what it was made of at the time. And they direct me to sit at this table. Again, the table looked like it was it was like a table, that sort of came up like a kitchen table, or like, a table you'd see at a restaurant. But again, it seemed like it was growing out of the floor. But the chairs were like this sort of dull metallic color. And at the time, they reminded me of like little tiny dentist chairs, just like tilted forwards for people to sit. And I was directed to sit one of the beings sat on the other side, and there was this like white cube on the table, and I finally managed to get the question out of my mouth, "Are you guys aliens?" And my voice was shaking, and I remember being embarrassed because I said it much louder than I had meant to, because I was like in such a fury, like to work myself up to like finally ask a question. And he said, "I'm sure that's what we seem." Well, he paused for a second and just looked at me, and he blinked, which I don't know how to explain why it was so weird that he blinked. I had never seen any of them blink. He blinked to me, and then he said, "I'm sure that's what we seem like to you. You know, we are from your future. You Earth humans are our ancient ancestors." And I almost looked at him, and I said, like, "Well, why are you visiting us? Like, why are you here?" And like he said, well, many of us, he said, many of us came for different reasons, my colleagues and I. And he sort of sort of motioned with his hand to the other ones who had followed us into the room. "We are here to study human biology at a point in time before you begin integrating technology into your bodies." And and then he said, "Others on the craft are here to study, human systems of governance, here to study some of the other creatures that reside here on Earth with you." Um, and I was just like, okay. And I was listening to him, but I was also trying to keep myself psyched up to like keep asking questions, because I wanted to know. I was a very inquisitive kid. I like I was always that kid asking 8 million questions about everything. And like a part of me was just like, okay, so this is like someone who's actually answering my questions and not just telling me to like go find something to do. Like, oh, go find a book to read or something. And I asked, well, like, are there any others visiting us? Because like, and he said, yeah, he said there are others visiting you. Um, Sorry, this is makes me, it
Understandable.
he he said he said that there were and this is what he said to me is the reason, one of the reasons why I came out. He said to me, um, um, he said to me, like, he said, like, "No, there are many beings from many worlds who are coming to visit, some local to your time, others not. We do not speak to most of them, though we do hear rumors that there were deals made with your leaders, technological, how he put it was technological gifts given in exchange for free reign to experiment on the humans that they serve." And that, as a kid, that kind of went over my head a little bit. And it's a little embarrassing, because the question I asked him next was if he liked pizza, because I was curious, because that was like the only food I ate, and I was like, "Well, do they eat?" And he said, "No, your food would be toxic for us." And then he transitioned super hard and asked me to move the cube, like, without touching it, and I couldn't do it. He and I tried over and over again. I couldn't do it, and so then they led me back outside through the curved hallway to that room with the white circles. But this time they didn't get onto the circle with me. They sent me back down to my backyard by myself. And I remember the light cleared. I was in my backyard, but I was alone. And I looked up and I saw the craft. It moved. I don't know if it flew away or if it teleported away, but it was suddenly just gone. It was just like, just gone. And I sort of paced around my backyard for a while. Door was still open. I paced around my backyard for a while, just sort of thinking. And I went back inside, went to bed, and that was the last time they ever came. And I always I always wondered if it was because I asked questions. I don't know.
Or is
Um,
it because the stories I've heard from different abductees about, they felt that they were selected because of telepathic abilities, a higher sense of, a
mhm.
higher connection of telepathy, that they were able to connect with you and tell you to get up out of bed and walk, that was a
Hmm.
signal to them, and over the course they were seeing how this was developing over the course of a number of years, from
Hmm.
insiders that I've spoken with. They were sought out specifically because of their high level telepathy abilities,
Mm.
and telekinesis abilities. And perhaps it had something to do with this cube that was unable to be moved, and
Hmm.
they felt like, okay, it hadn't progressed to the level where they were going to keep coming. So
Right. It's
what?
like,
Maybe
okay.
it wasn't your pizza question at all. It was the cube, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That, and that's basically, as an adult, best I could think. It's like, well, I couldn't move the cube, so I guess they were done with me. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing of it is, though, is that over the years, as I've thought about this, like, I have a lot of fragmentary memories, like, in between these experiences that I really don't know how to make sense of, because they're not connected to being taken, they're not connected to being brought back. It's just like fragmentary memory walking down that curved hallway, fragmentary memories of being brought into that room. That wasn't the only time they asked me to move the cube, assuming that these memory fragments I have were a part of it, and like I have no reason to assume they're not. Like, I don't remember ever, like, this wasn't my first time in that room. Like, I knew that I was about to be asked to move that cube. That's one of the things that clues me in why I've also like spoken about some of these fragmentary memories, because I knew what was going to happen in that room with the cube, and I knew that was, if I was going to like ask a question, this was going to be my only shot. For a lot of years, getting into why I've decided to come forward now, for a lot of years, I had no idea what to do with any of this information. I in the few months after that last experience, I just knew that they weren't going to come back. I just, like, I felt it in my bones that they were done with me. And that's when I started, like, going to the library proper and seeing all the books that I could find about the topic. And, like, I've never really known what to do with these memories, what to make of it. It took me a long time to, like, come to terms with, like, yeah, I mean, it happened. Like,
Did you go through any sort of a regret? I've talked to some insiders who've gone through regression hypnosis, those who have got similar experiences to try to pull out more of the fragments to put a larger story together. Is that something you've considered or decided to do at all?
I haven't done anything like that because the idea of, well, for the longest time, the idea of telling anyone about this just was like, mm-mm, mm-mm,
Yeah.
they're gonna cart me away somewhere. I like, how does one talk about this? Like, how do I, like, just like, so I was taken by beings when I was a kid. Just like, I had no idea. It's something I've thought about over the years, but it's never something I've actively taken steps to do. As an adult, I've been wanting to see if I wanted to create my own timeline as clear as I can remember before doing anything like hypnosis or anything like that, because I've read a lot of the books and stuff, and I've seen that it seems like a tool that could be used to help a lot of people, but at the same time I'm also aware of some of the problematic elements of hypnotic regression. And I just, if I were to do something like that, I want to go into it knowing for myself what is real, what is not, like what I experience, what to the best of my knowledge I've experienced, and what I haven't.
One
Maybe
thing we
I'll do
did,
that eventually.
yeah. I mean, at your own time, your own pace, right? No one,
Mhm.
this is an experience you had, and you didn't talk about it for what, 20 years or more, right? Or more than that,
Mhm.
publicly. Um,
Yeah.
so one thing we didn't talk about here is what, other than the size of these creatures and the sort of spacesuit or whatever sort of suit they were wearing, the sort of silvery jumpsuit, what do they look like?
They were about my height. They had large heads, frail bodies. They looked like on brand, I don't know how else to put it, for how other people have described like grays. The only difference being there was like a greenish tint to their skin. Some of them were a little greener than others now that I'm thinking about it. But it was gray green for the most part. They all looked mostly the same. Um, their arms, their arms were just a smidge longer, just came down like just below their knees. They had like they had four fingers that like there were three of them that were like out like this, and there was one that like sort of like their hands, I don't know how to explain this, their hands kind of wrapped around, and there was like a fourth finger that was like a little bit apart
Hmm.
from their thing, because when they were holding the wand it was like this. They weren't like gripping it like this, they were like holding it like this.
Hmm.
um so yeah, that's what they looked like.
I get the sense that, well, there's been a lot of people that have speculated that these these aliens, these creatures are not aliens at all, that they've been here for thousands of years, long before we've been around, and they've been living, whether
Hmm.
it's under the ocean, here as some sort of interdimensional angel-like beings that are here.
Hmm.
But when you were communicating with them, did you get the sense that they were from another world, an off-planet world? And they said they told you they were here from the future to study you. So did you get the sense that they
Yeah.
were from here or someplace else?
That's the thing. I forgot to mention. He mentioned when I was it's it's nerve-wracking talking about this stuff. He said to me, the thing that he said to me, and I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget this part, because this conversation is ultimately why I decided to come forward, because it's like, okay, this seems like information that would add to the conversation that people really need to know about. He
Right.
said, when I asked him, why did you come here? He said, at our point in time, we live on a planet very far away from Earth, and the beings who live there are not friendly towards us.
Hmm.
And that always, again, it went over my head as a kid, but that's something I've thought about a lot as an adult. So they said they're our ancestors. They said they don't live on Earth, and they said that they can't come to Earth in their time because I guess the beings who live there are not friendly towards us, whatever that means.
But they're from the future.
Uh, yeah, they said they were from. They said, that's what he said to me when I asked him that first question, like, "Are you guys aliens?" And he said, "I'm sure that's what we seem like to you. Um, we are from your future. You Earth humans are our ancient ancestors."
Wow. That's unbelievable. I don't know how as a child who, for me, fascinated by science fiction as a child and time travel, the idea of it, I don't know how I would have been able to keep that quiet. How did you deal with that as an 8 to 10-year-old? Did you have any siblings? You didn't talk to your parents about it? Any friends that you mentioned it to? And if not, I mean, it
I
must have been so difficult to keep that bottled up, right?
it ate away at me. You know, it was very isolating because I grew up in a household, and this is no disrespect to my dad. My dad's a very down to earth. What's real is what I can see, and anything beyond that, and
Right.
I would what I would try to do with my brother and what I would try to do with my friends would be like to sort of ask what they thought, like, so hey, what do you think about like aliens and stuff? Do you think like that's real? And they would be like, "Pff, no." So I was just like, "Oh, okay. No reason.
Yeah.
No, don't worry
Yeah. Well,
about
let
wearing
me tell
hats."
you what happened to me last night then. Yeah, you're going to keep that quiet, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It just, I was, I was very used to being dismissed by a lot of the adults around me as a kid, and I didn't know what to do with it. It ate away at me throughout my childhood. It had always kind of ate at me a little bit, and like, I would research, as I grew older, into like teenage years and adulthood, I really started doing research to try and figure out what the hell happened to me. I saw that, like, okay, oh crap, like, so I'm not the only one that things like this have happened to, but like, what do I do with this?
Has anyone big in the field of ufology, members of Congress, anybody else, come to you to get more of your story, or say what you've told us, what you're saying publicly, tracks with other information that we have, or have they been quiet?
No, I haven't heard from anybody.
Huh. Are you
I
surprised
always
by Are you surprised by what's been happening in Congress right now?
I'm surprised. I am very surprised at what's happening in Congress right now, because I honestly, I never thought that we would get to the point we're at now. It's like, I read the stories, I was very quickly, like as a teenager, I discovered, George Knapp and the Bob Lazar story and all that. And I never thought that any of this would come to the light of the day at all, let alone like a hearing in Congress, let alone a guy like David Grush coming forward. I never thought that I didn't think I would live to see the day.
Have you had any
So yeah.
incidents since then, 10 years old? Nothing since that moment when you walked away from in the backyard that day. Has anything shown itself, messages presented itself to you?
No, nothing. No, nothing has. I've seen UFOs. I've seen some things in the sky a few times over the years, but never anything like what happened to me as a kid. I had a weird missing time experience when I was 17, but I don't remember anything other than like, I was down in like, I sort of hung out in my basement a lot when I was 17. It was like kind of like my lair. You know, I remember there was a weird missing time experience where I remembered walking upstairs. I remember going to bed, but then I woke up at like 2 in the morning back in the basement again. And the next morning, and this was a Saturday leading into Sunday, and I walked outside to the backyard because, I'm like, missing time experience.
It's unbelievable. What do you do with this information now? You're processing this idea that there was individuals from the future, which I presume would be living here on Earth, and we would not see them as alien because it seemed to be this message that you received is, well, I could see how you would think we're an alien, but in the future, this is pretty common. You're our ancient ancestors here on Earth. We're just here, just doing some research here. I mean, how do you process that?
I'm a comic artist, and I'm a writer. You know, um, I wrote a lot of like stories growing up as a kid about like, superheroes and crap. Never wrote anything about aliens or anything like that. But I writing has always sort of been a way. Writing and art has always been the way I process things. So, but it's been very lonely,
Do you have
very
kids?
very lonely experience. Yes, I have three.
3 kids. What are their ages?
They are 7, 9, and 11.
Have you told them about this?
I have not. That's a thing that my they're you know I mean technically they're my stepkids, they're my fiance's kids, but like I've raised them, they're my kids.
Yeah.
And it's like, how would I even like, I don't want to shatter their worlds, I don't want to scare them, because one of the things I do remember as a kid very clearly was in between and after these experiences, just I was very fearful because it made me feel very small. And I was a kid who kind of already felt that way to begin with, knowing that there were so many other things out here, not knowing what their intentions were. And then I started reading some of these books, and it was a very, this living with this knowledge as a kid was scary. And I don't, I don't want to do that to them. I don't want to like, I don't want to lie to them, but I also don't want to like, I just, I don't want to pass that on to them.
Right. That anxiety, that loneliness that
Mhm.
you experienced. Yeah. Have people tried to explain it away? Have people, skeptics, come after you to say, you're making this up. You don't know what you're talking about.
Oh
You
yeah.
should go see some professionals, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Like I came out on X, so like I of course expected to, a lot of that to come out of the word works, and it did, but I don't really engage with any of those comments. It the way I figured is like, folks are either going to believe me or they're not going to believe me, but like it happened.
Right.
Like
Right.
it happened. So you don't want to believe me, that's, cool,
That's
but it
on you.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what's next for you then? Do you anticipate maybe writing a book about this? yeah, what's next for you on this? Are you going down more of a rabbit hole on these discoveries now that you've come out publicly? Again, I'd be curious how many people would come forward to you. Hopefully, this interview maybe brings some good people. We've been surrounded by very good people, and we're blessed in our community here on this show that they would reach out to you and maybe offer guidance or maybe further the story in some kind of way.
Yeah, you know, like you said, it was David Grush coming forward is really what inspired me to come forward, because it's like the thing that I keep coming back to is like, okay, so as great as it is what's happening in Congress. It's the gatekeepers, so to speak. They're I think George Knapp has said it. They're not going to give up the goodies without a fight. But and there are all these whistleblowers, and understandably their hands are tied by maybe it's NDAs, maybe threats of retaliation, but like I don't have any of that holding me back. I've always had this feeling in my bones, like I am not the only one in my like this has happened to, but like especially like in my generation, I can just I don't know how to explain it other than I can just feel it in my bones that there are others. Like beings not of this world are in contact with humanity. Like I mean, there's no question about it. They're in contact with us, and like you were saying, it all evidence seems to point to that they have been in contact with us. Multiple different groups of them, and like it just to me it seems like it's time for maybe us experiencers to come forward and create this conversation to try to push things forward ourselves, because I mean nobody's going to do it for us.
Right. And whether
uh,
it's the technology, the healing, I'm still struck by something you said that they wanted to come back to a time before we started implanting ourselves with technology. And it's like we're at this moment, well, they have to go back to
mhm,
the year 2024 or, before that period when we're now
mhm,
have Elon Musk, implanting chips in people's brains and so forth. So I guess they
and
nailed that
I,
timeline pretty specifically, right?
yeah, and that's really, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when I started seeing all this Neuralink stuff, that's another thing that really is like, okay, so wow, so they were right. Okay, so like it just
Did they say
it's
it was
like
going to be
okay, so
bad? Where they wanted to come back and look at you as wow, this is when stuff really went bad for humanity, and we want to get a cleaner sample. We want to look at someone who hasn't been affected by this yet.
um they didn't say whether or not it was bad, and like this is sheer speculation on my part, but just from the impression I got, saying that they didn't live on Earth, saying that the beings who lived on Earth in their time weren't friendly to them, I get the impression that it maybe wasn't great, this integration process. And someone actually on one of my posts, someone said something that really clicked with me. They're like, well, maybe they can't tell the difference between where they start and where the tech ends and they start anymore. Maybe them coming back was them trying to figure that out for whatever end.
Hmm.
Which really struck me, because I mean it makes sense. And then he said something that really, I wish I could remember the username, because I would say it, but I can't. Whoever you are out there, they said like maybe that white cube was their tech. Maybe they were seeing if you could telepathically interface with their tech without any sort of technological implant. And that is something I had never thought of before. And I mean, is that what was going on? I have absolutely no idea, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, it's just mind bending to think about it. And I think in our puny brains, when we're trying to wrap our head around it, it's just we're operating on such a narrow section right now.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's just
Hmm.
something so much bigger and explicable that we can't describe. Aaron, well, thank you, so much for your bravery and your time in sharing this story. And I hope, if anyone watching wants to reach out to Aaron on X and maybe make a connection in that way, or share your story, maybe inspire someone else to come forward in any way, or maybe to help investigate this story even further and carry this conversation further. I hope that they do. Any final thoughts, Aaron, that you want to share with us before we go?
Well, like I was saying, this, you know, from a historical perspective, this is important. As someone who studied history as an adult, like, beings not of this world are in regular contact with humanity. That's super, super clear. And like, they have been visiting us, they're visiting us now, and I have no reason to believe they're going to stop. And it's like, I just, this is like, this is just something that's very important to, like, us as a human race. The idea of moving beyond our own planet, of interacting with cultures from other worlds. It's a conversation that needs to happen, but like, nobody's talking about it. So I think it's time to start talking about it.
Or they talk about it and they become vilified, or there's these camps that are set up, and you get into like
Hmm.
UFO Twitter anger, and all this craziness. So you're right about that. I think I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think it's one of the most important stories, one of the biggest stories of in our history. The fact that we are not alone and there are other creatures from other planets interacting with us here on Earth, and our government is largely keeping it quiet, keeping it hidden from us. I mean, can you think of a bigger story? But apparently people
I, I,
people love
I
people
sure
love to
can.
compartmentalize, and they love to say that that's not, it's a distraction, it's fakery, and it's not important. But I disagree with that wholeheartedly. So I couldn't agree more with you, Aaron. Well, thank you so much. My guest has been Aaron Schultz, brave and coming forward and sharing this story. We appreciate it. And you can follow Aaron on X. It's Aaron Schultz Art on X, and we'll have it linked up in the description if anyone wants to reach out. So, Aaron, thanks so much for your time today on Redacted. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.